it talks about a salesman that did about $40 million in a year. I mean, I'm sure he made something like $2 million that year. He's still waiting for that time to come back. But
I think he might be waiting for a while.
Waiting for a very long time. You know, and those were the days when people used to buy a condo before it was turned over to them, and at the time of the turnover, they'll just flip the contract and make themselves as much as $100,000. Well, those times are gone. Folks, there are just so many war stories in here and interesting stories. I want to tell you that the prices that people were paying in 2003 and 2004, now in 2010, the prices have slid back to that time. Some of them have even gone down to 1999 where the prices were. And some of the major hits were taken by McLean, Potomac, Bethesda. I mean, 25-30% hit.
It's significant.
It's significant. Of course, houses for a living, and many of you are living there not thinking whether the price goes up or down because we still have to live. But there are just so many stories. It's just amazing. I loved reading this article.
Well, in other economic news, many of you probably know that cars are becoming more and more common in India. The roads and infrastructure are being built up, and there are major car factories, both Indian and foreign, in India, employing a lot of people who used to be farmers. You know, farming is a very risky business in India, and it can be quite difficult and very tiring. And so there are a lot of places now where large swaths of farmland have been bought up so that a big factory can be open in that place. And this BBC article compared two different factories, one that opened up and then ended up closing, really putting those farmers in a difficult position, and another one that's been successful. Tata Motors opened a factory and at first, was employing people. There was this economy building up around that factory. But there's been a lot of political trouble because there are some people who disagree with taking really fertile farmland and turning it into factory space. And so because of all those political hassles, Tata moved out.
Now that was in Calcutta.
Yeah, exactly, in East India. So they are in bad shape. Those farmers said we really wanted these factory jobs and now we don't have them. But then there's a Hyundai factory in another part of the country where they've been much more successful, and the farmers have kept their jobs, and that's been flourishing. And, on the surface, it seems like, oh, why would we take up farmland to build factories? It's, more pollution and industrialization. But on the other hand, you talk to farmers, and they say, these are good, steady jobs, and we need them. We can't afford to take all the risks involved with farming.
That's why Gujarat is touting themselves a state that can make things happen. They allowed Tata Motors to come in and open the factory, very successful. So Gujarat is #1 state in India for allowing these factories. So you're right, farmers do need steady jobs for their kids and others. And I want to tell you, there are people out there that will tell you, no, we don't want industrialization. We want to live a natural life.
And it's a toss-up, and I think that's where we end up in these political fights, where sometimes people lose out on both sides. They lose their farmland and they lose their factory job. That, I think, is the saddest part.
But, folks, Indian cities have a different problem. If anybody read Washington Post, that there's actually being live-in arrangements in India before marriage.
Things are changing.
Things are changing. I like a couple of quotes. Here in the cities, they're exposed to new professions, financial independence, increased interaction between men and women, late working hours, and new modes of relationship. They are restless and don't want to deny themselves the pleasures of new world.
Yeah, and I think it is natural when you think about how many young people are living independently, not with their families in these cities. And, in the United States, this shift happened maybe a generation ago, but I'm not surprised that that's happening in India as well.
But the girls are not telling their relatives.
Well, yeah.
They do admit to their parents. And this is what is another quote, which says, now my parents know, but they prefer not to discuss it with me. But when my relatives ask, I lie and pretend to be living alone. I don't want them to taunt my parents about it.
Yeah, because you fear for the reputation of your entire family, right? It's not just about your individual actions. How does that reflect on your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, right?
It's an amazing trend. I don't know whether you need to be happy about it, but young people will get there. Eventually, with the communication the way it is around the world, if it's happening in one part of the world, it's bound to happen in the other part of the world.
But I think what the interesting point that you make is that even though live-in relationships before marriage have been common in other parts of the world, the form it's taking in India is a little bit different because there is this hiding it from the relatives and not wanting to ruin the reputation of your family. There's sort of risks involved.
That will be taken away by time.
Yeah.
Time heals everything.
Cell phones are really changing everything. When you look at this very small, remote area in central India, Chhattisgarh, that is an area that is really cut off in terms of the digital divide. There's no internet access. There's some TV and radio, but a lot of the people are illiterate, so they don't really have access to newspapers. And whatever news they do hear is usually on the national level, right? It's Doordarshan, it's news about the entire country, but it's not about their area, where they live. And all of us would like to know what's going on around us. Cell phones are changing that. There is a new service called CGNet, and that is a way in which people can use their cell phones to call into a central place in Bangalore and then be able to listen to programming on their cell phone. This eliminates all of the gap that there is in terms of technology for people because they can hear programming in their own language about where they live. They can hear news. They can hear entertainment, singing, music. It's really making a big difference in people's lives, and it seems like such a simple thing that you can do with a phone.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to figure it out. How would they keep phone charged?
That's a good question. If there's obviously electricity in this part of the country so that they can actually be able to charge their phones. And a lot of times many people will share one phone and listen over one speaker phone to a particular broadcast. So it's kind of a community event, not just an individual one. But you know what struck me? That only 2% of space in mainstream media is dedicated to covering the livelihood issues of India's poor and overlooked tribal people. So when you think about it, they're completely, left out of the national conversation about what's happening in the country. And so it's so important then to have this kind of local access.
They're taking things in their own hands.
That's right.
They're not depending on the government to deliver them something. I like the idea. Here's an idea that you might like. Last 10 pounds are probably pretty hard to shed. When you're on a diet, you can get all the poundage out except the last 10 pounds. Now the major body of research has proved that the last 10 pounds you don't have to shed. Actually, they're good for you. They're not going to cause you a heart attack. They're not going